Welcome to Not a Great Whisperer podcast. This is your host, Katie Ray. I am joined with Pastor George Wood today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So we met through Kevin, one of my very good friends. They are actually neighbors, and George's story really resonated with me as well as inspired me because he is pushing forth really like the beliefs I have in my heart about God and about belief and about helping people throughout their journey. And you started with, was it the Timothy Initiative?
Yeah.
Timothy Initiative. Mm-hmm. And now Sober Truth Project.
Yes.
Okay. So Timothy Initiative will still be going on with Sober Truth kind of alongside it, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I would love for you to just tell the audience how you started and how you got to where you are. So how you started the Timothy Initiative and how you got to where you are today.
Okay. Well, once again, thanks for having me.
Thanks.
It's kind of a long and storied journey. To do something like the Timothy Initiative, which is a ministry that works with men coming out of addiction, homelessness, or brokenness of some sort. Typically, to be any good at it, you have to come through the same thing. So for me, my own journey played a role in that, of course. And, my life has been one that has been very up and down, very tumultuous at times, and one filled with a lot of highs and a lot of lows. And, my own story with addiction began at a very young age. My own story of abuse, began at a very young age. My own story of dealing with mental health issues began at a very young age. But the interesting thing is, it took a journey for me to understand that those things were happening. For the longest time, I just thought it was me that was just broken, that was just unlovable, someone that didn't have any value. And one by one, as my journey progressed, as I found my way to sobriety, back into addiction, to sobriety again, back into addiction, and that cycle that happened multiple times. Somewhere along the way, I met God, and it was really through God that I realized there's more to my story than I even realized, and it's not just about the the addiction. It's not just about the abuse. It's about something that God put in me before the foundations of the world, which is an identity that I didn't know I even had, and for the longest time that was masked by the addiction and by the mental health issues and the multiple suicide attempts where, all I wanted to do was escape this world, escape this life. And I tried really hard to do that, and I was really good at it. But somewhere along the way, right around when I was, 33 in 2002, I had a nervous breakdown. And finally, everything just kind of came to a head. And at the time, I had just had a wonderful baby boy. I had a wife. We had plans for a future, but that breakdown caused me to fall into a dark pit of despair that she wasn't equipped, nor was anybody in my life really equipped at the time to really help me out of. And, somewhere, somehow, over the couple years of being homeless, being in and out of mental institutions and detox wards, ironically, I gave up. I finally said, that's it, I'm done. And I was, walking down a road one day, and I had just left a psychiatric ward, and I was walking down the road, and I just finally cried out to God and said, if you're, real, which I believe you are, either kill me or do something different, because I don't think that you are doing this for, your own enjoyment. And, the craziest thing is 15 minutes after I did that, I got a phone call from a friend that I'd met at a detox unit the year before. And he said, hey, are you okay? And I said, I'm actually walking down the road, not really okay. And he said, well, the strangest thing is God just told me to reach out to you, that he said you were in need. And, what can I say? God does some amazing things.
Yeah.
And so, he picked me up, and I ended up getting into a detox or rehab at the time, and found this, this amazing old man that I call Pops, who led me to Jesus and led me to grace and forgiveness and emotional and internal healing that I'd never thought I'd really experience. And, I realized then, by this time I'm 35 years old, and I realized that, the dreams of me being some huge worldly success needed to fade to the back, and for me to really put forward what it was that God wanted me to do. And that's where I recognized that I was called to help other broken men, because my journey, was so difficult and challenging that I knew others needed to experience something different. And that's kind of like the basis of how I prepared to be ready to lead something like the Timothy Initiative.
So I just think that it was such a powerful story. But for me, I hear, you had to go through all of these hardships to really see it. So your aha moment was not only that phone call, but everything within your journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How are you able to really go day by day and know that the men that you're helping or the families that you're helping, are going to might have another rough patch, or this might not be the last time? It's like they might have a relapse or something. Like, how are you able to continue doing this work and knowing that there's going to be more? Like, how do you message that to them? Because I feel like it has to be heartbreaking for you again to
Sure.
like continue to watch it, or like know that they have to continue this journey. How does that feel throughout it?
I think as human beings, we typically have these moments in our lives that become pivotal moments that stand out above all the rest, where they're just logged in the back of our mind, so that when those moments of giving up come up, those moments come back to the forefront of our mind, and we're able to say, okay, that's why I keep going. Just real quick, in 2008, I began to put together the Timothy Initiative. In 2009, I said, okay, we're going to make this an official ministry, 501c3, we're going to do it right. And then, lo and behold, July 3rd of 2009, my sister died from a drug overdose. And, obviously we had done drugs together. We, we lived life, and we both hit the same struggles. And I had tried to help her right before death. And so her dying and me being like, and I want to help other people. How do I, what? I couldn't even help my sister. And somehow I had the resolve to carry on and continue to say, no, I'm going to do this Timothy Initiative thing. And then, 6 or 7 months later, in January of 2010, my brother died from a drug overdose. And so, what can I say, where that will really shake you when the very thing you think you're called to is the very thing that you failed at miserably in your own life, personally and otherwise. I tried to help both my brother and my sister. We had the same parents, so by blood, we struggled with the same disease. If anybody, when we were, all three of us were still in our addiction, if anybody would have asked, which one do you think is going to die? I would have been everyone's first choice. So for me to be like, okay, my brother was a lawyer. He was a partner at one of the biggest law firms in Tampa. I mean, we weren't like street people on the addicts. Not that there's a difference, but just to paint a picture.
People have of a
stereotype. Let me paint a picture. Okay, we're talking about highly, intelligent and evolved people as far as society thinks of people, but it doesn't matter. It just doesn't. And so I, had to make a decision. Do I let that be the thing that pushes me away from what I think the Lord is calling me to, or do I let that propel me to help others? Where no, I did not help my brother and I did not help my sister. And that will, for the rest of my life, be something that I have to bear. But I can help somebody else's family. I can help someone else find freedom. And even if they don't find freedom, they can find another day to be alive. And more important to me than even freedom is that they can come to know that there's a Father in heaven that did create them for more than this, and that this world is a really, really cruel place most of the time. And, we can't look at the cruelty of this world and think that that is the Father in heaven, because it's just not. Even, controversially speaking, it's not even church. It's not even religion. The Father in heaven is something totally different, especially from American religion. It is just, he just is. He wants a relationship with us. He wants us to know that we are already one with him and that he already chose us and that he loves us. Not come to my church, dress a certain way, act a certain way, say the right things. Not that at all. Not that at all. You don't have to ascribe to a certain set of political beliefs. You don't have to worry about the things that most of the church in America worries about. But there is a Father in heaven that wants every one of his children to know that they're his beloved daughters and sons, and that, he is with them through everything painful that they go through. For me, it's that knowledge that maybe a person that I'm working with or walking with does not stay sober for the rest of their life. But that's not even the goal, because that's not even a realistic goal. But if they can come to know that there is a Father in heaven that loves them, even though they may be thinking they're in the worst sin, because, whatever the world may say that this is the worst sin,
The shame. Yeah.
the shame of it all, now he's still right there. He still loves you and he still chooses you.
When you first shared your story for the first time with either one person or a group, how did that feel? Because there's so much shame around addiction. And as a wife of a recovering addict, I can feel it when I tell my story. And I'm at the point where I don't really care what other people think. But I know that for you, your message is strong. Mm-hmm. But the first time you shared it, how was that feeling?
Yeah, just like anybody, the first time I shared it, I was embarrassed. I was in, denial of who I really was. Part of that was just the pride I was stuck in, and it was just the false illusion that life was supposed to be something else. Like I'm supposed to be this big worldly success and whatnot, and this is just one more nail in that coffin of that life dream never happening. So yeah, it's really hard. I think the interesting thing for me has been dating, where, you get sober, and then, I never did get back together with my first wife, right? So when I went into recovery and found Jesus, I was a single man. And when it came time to actually date, that's where it really becomes complicated, because you got a choice. You can lie to this other person and say, oh, I'm all good.
Yeah.
Or you can say, hey, listen, here's my story. Mm-hmm. And I got to give you every option or opportunity to back out before this goes too far. And so, I'm married to an amazing, amazing woman now, and she's just phenomenal, and just an amazing woman who loves the Lord, is in full-time ministry. But even on, our first date, I remember being like, hey, she knew about me already. It wasn't a blind date per se, but to be like, listen, just so you know, because people often don't understand addiction. We're like, hey, I'm set free and all that stuff by the blood of Jesus and yada, yada. I get all that. But there's a reality that I can never, ever pick up a drink again for the rest of my life. And if I do, then game is over, man. And so, I don't want her to go into this relationship, didn't want her to go into this relationship where, hey, we're at a Christmas party and you're like, oh, you can have just one glass of wine. And,
Mm-hmm.
No, this is who I am. And I want you to,
accept it or not.
Yeah, accept it or not, but let's not try to change that. And so, interestingly enough, it's as much shame as I felt the first time I had to share that I was in recovery, that was in a room full of other people in recovery.
Yep.
But on a date, and you're like, oh man, I haven't dated.
Here
it is. I haven't even dated in 5 years. And I'm sitting down telling this other person, like, here's
my triggers, or here's my,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, I can't drive for another 5 years. So
yeah,
you have to drive everywhere. Yeah. So it was,
that was the first date.
Yep.
I love it. I think honesty is so important. That's so important.
This is what I tell the men I work with. Don't take a hostage. Don't do that. It's not fair to them. And it's not good for your recovery, because you're going to regret it.
Oh, yeah. Part of recovery is honesty, right? And just kind of owning everything that's happening. And for me, I was the same with my husband when he shared in front of a group of men. And I was like, why can't you share that story like that with me? Because it directly affected my life. But he was like, it's different when people are in recovery with you. Like it's a story where you don't actually feel the judgment right away, and you're trying to help one person, like someone helped him. So it was a lot to learn. But I think there's not enough education. There's so much stigma around it.
Right.
And what you're doing is so powerful to me, not only in recovery, but also with, I know you say religion's a bad word, but also in religion, because I am very, 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 very against the Catholic religion because I grew up in it. Kindergarten through 12th grade, I was in Catholic school. I was questioning all these things we were learning. They're so literal and it's like these times are a little different than now. And I was very big on just loving everybody because my dad is gay. And I think you should judge people on their character, not like the differences. And so I was very big on that. And I got so much pushback because of these people that go to church every Sunday or these people that go into this Catholic school, and I was just like, why is this so hard for people to just love other people? And when we chatted, I was like, yes, a pastor who does exemplify this and just allows people to be themselves.
Right.
So you have changed your messaging over the years. What brought that?
Yeah.
I like how you laughed at that. You're like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what brought that on?
Okay, so I read this book once, many times, but A Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. Great book, highly recommend it. Go pick it up today. But in the book, he talks about maps. And he says that when we form a map in our mind that basically when we get to the point where we think we know the directions everywhere, we've stopped growing. And it's only when we, continue to say, maybe I should turn left, maybe I should turn right, maybe I should go straight, maybe I need to back up, that we're still developing a map, and therefore we're still growing as human beings, and therefore still living, because the moment you stop growing, you're dying. And the average of when people typically stop growing is very young. It's very scary. It's like in their 20s where they think they have life all mapped out. And so for me, when I finally, found Jesus and got sober, of course, in the beginning, I was like, yeah, okay, if I relapse and die in my relapse, I'm going to hell. So I don't want to do that. And, a couple of years go by and I'm like, okay, that's utterly ridiculous. Okay, that's not at all Jesus. Yeah. And so I'm like, maybe I still need to kind of grow my map. And it's funny as we evolve as people in recovery. Often we started using at such a young age that we stopped growing there. And so even though I'm 51 today, I really look at it as I'm more like 31 because there's 20 years that I was just kind of like here in this world, but not doing anything. Mm-hmm. So I'm still like evolving as a human being. And so for me, being open to recognizing I don't have all the answers. And my message in the very beginning was very much one out of pride and insecurity. So if we have pride on one hand, we recognize that that's actually based in insecurity. And so as somebody feeling shame as an addict, and now I'm trying to get started up again, mm-hmm. I got to really have my crap together. And so it was important to be the authority on things. And so, you get kicked in the teeth enough times, you're like, okay, I'm not the authority at all. So let's just say I don't have the answers. And sort of my message in the beginning probably was one of, don't do this, don't do that. This is what's going to happen. And by the way, there's some Jesus in there. Until today, where it's like, oh, listen, it's all about Jesus, what he did on the cross, the Father in heaven. And yeah, there's probably some things you're supposed to do, but he'll tell you that along the way. So
it's actually perfect. And there's some things here and there that you're going to do, but it's neither here nor there.
Well, it's interesting because, I've been doing a lot of thinking. Kevin has pushed me to, write an inclusive statement for the Sober Truth Project. And I really think that is important because I'm trying to help save lives, not tell people how to follow Jesus. Those are two different things. Discipleship, if I'm a Christian discipleship program, is going to try to say, this is what we think you should do. And you can decide to join that discipleship program or not. That's completely up to the person. But they all say different things. So decide which one you want to be in. But for me, it's like, I just want people to know the Father in heaven. So therefore, don't kill yourself today. I want you to know the Father in heaven. So don't let your mental health issues paralyze you to the point where you can't live anymore. I want you to know the Father in heaven so that you know that your addiction is not insurmountable. Now, whether you're gay, whether you're transgender, whether you're Republican, as hard as that is for me to say, or a Democrat, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
Okay, it doesn't. Not
You're
for
trying to save lives.
What we're doing in Sober Truth Project is trying to save lives, not decide how a person should stand before the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do I think that people go before the Lord and He changes things in them? Yeah, I'm a perfect example of that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not for me to decide what He's going to change in a person. If I can just let people know that they're loved and that the Father is there with them, He'll take care of the rest. Okay, don't kill yourself today. Don't go back into your addiction today. There's another answer. Don't give up on your mental health, because you can be healthy. You can be stable. And these other things that we put in front of that, the other barriers, for me, they just got to go away,
I think also people thinking that you need to be perfect and, you don't make mistakes or you don't decide possibly. There's a choice sometimes, but there's also a disease behind it. And it's like people don't understand that or educate themselves on it, and so that stigma just sits there. And really what we all need is connection. And we were talking about like anonymous. Why are we doing anonymous meetings, and why is it so much shame around the recovery process, where we're not just opening up and connecting with people? Because I love that you said you're just really out to save lives. Like, I'm not here to label you. I'm here to teach you about Jesus and save your life. Like, really, you're going to take it and you're going to run with it and do what you want with it. But it's not about, oh, okay, hi, welcome. Oh, are you gay? No? Okay, come on in. Like, you're not. And I love that Kevin told you to do an inclusive message, because it is important, because people are going to see the backing of certain beliefs of religious organizations or churches or things like that. And there's so much hateful statements on simple websites. And you're just like, wow, this doesn't include everybody. Like, this isn't very welcoming at all.
Yeah, it's, I read something just this morning, as a matter of fact, where it was just a statement that said, please remember that non-believers don't read the Bible, they read you. So as someone who follows Jesus, I want people to read me and see me in a way that says, that guy looks like Jesus. Because he loves other people, not because he tells other people what they're doing wrong. I've walked this out over the last 11 years with the men of TI. And I think the biggest thing that has really blown people's minds and continues to is the fact that our recovery rate is higher than anywhere in the world. I literally can say that sitting here today, saying I research and study this stuff, and nobody can sit before you and tell you that we have 90% of our men make it to 2 and 3 years sober. 90%. That's like unheard of. And the reality is, like, what do we do so different there? I don't tell people, what beliefs they have are wrong. I just tell people about Jesus. And we form this community of people that realize we're all broken. No one's above the other one. And we can learn from each other, and we can do life with each other. And if we come together and love one another, then things that we could have never believed that would happen. Guys get their daughters back. Guys get their wives back. Guys get, their careers back. Guys stay part of what we're doing and see like untold things happen in their life that they never even would have considered. And it's because of a sort of this community of acceptance. We don't accept the, things that are harmful to a person, but the things that society have determined that are harmful to people, sometimes it's not their right to decide, right? And so, when we come together in the Timothy Initiative, these guys that society has cast aside, cast away, have really proven to me that if we could teach the world to live the way Jesus actually calls us to live, then we would eliminate so many of the problems that we have.
And on your hardest days, because you do hard work every day, leading others and also for your own recovery, what's your go-to to really get your mind praying? Or I'm assuming. But what's your go-to? Or getting a new tattoo because you're all inked up?
I love tattoos. I do. I love tattoos. I'm a big fan of tattoos, but they're also very expensive. So
Yeah,
no, I
I was just
I
gonna-
can't do that on my every day, and you kind of run out of skin after a while. So
True.
neither here nor there. But no, listen, I get the Christian response should be I pray, right? But no, that's kind of not what I do. I look to the people in my life that God has really changed because of what He's done through me, and it reminds me what I do is important. I just have an incredible group of people around me. I live in community, which is a really loaded concept to some people, but I live with, some of my best friends in the world. I live in a community of about 14 of us over, on one or two properties, but we're all within 100 feet of each other. And we do life with each other, and we try to serve our very, very poor neighborhood together. But, four of the men that live there are guys that have been with me for over 5 years. And I've seen God do so much in them. And I'm just so humbled. I'm going to have to fight crying right now because that is what, to me, like, I can see that and say, I don't care how bad today is. That 5 years with these men has been the biggest and best thing I've ever built in my life. And God promises that He'll continue to do that. And so sometimes praying is hard when you're really having a bad day. And I'm always talking to God, but to say I'm having a bad day, I'm just going to go sit in a corner. I think that's what some people imagine. Mm-hmm. So the prayer is constantly happening. The dialogue with God is always happening. And so he's saying, yeah, today's bad. This guy died, or this guy left, or this guy's in prison, or this happened, or that happened, or you can't pay your bills again, but look at this. Look at this guy's life. Wouldn't you lay it all down for him to have that life? And the answer is always yes, absolutely.
That's beautiful. And with everything happening with the pandemic and everything, what type of support have you seen that you need to give more of? I know people are talking about addiction and being home and kind of being in your thoughts, and it's going to be worse. And for either alcoholics or drug addicts, or, what was your take on the whole pandemic and being quarantined and making sure that you were also keeping everyone safe, but also providing the support you needed?
It's kind of funny. I'm going to refer back to what I just said, where being in community, we were all like
quarantined together.
Yeah.
Kind of worked out.
Literally, it did. We were all like,
oh, good.
Man, I feel guilty. The rest of the world is suffering, but we're all still together. But it reinforced in me the power of being connected and how important it is to people. And the fact that the quarantine is happening and it is extending. I can tell you from somebody that is in the battle every day that it's a very real thing that we are seeing, more overdose deaths than we've seen since the height of the pill mill era. We are seeing people with more mental health issues than we have ever seen. And I do believe, unfortunately, that we're only seeing the beginning of it. And so for me, it's trying to realize or find, whatever resources are out there. We've opened up, our new office for the Timothy Initiative Sober Truth Project in the middle of the inner city in one of the poorest areas of Tampa. And we've actually, because of the pandemic, we decided to open our doors to become an outreach and resource center to the community around us, instead of just being an office for us. Mm-hmm. And so that we can help some of the poorest of the poor and people without access to anything get what they need, whether it's food stamps, whether it's Social Security, whether it's something to eat for the day. And we're just getting our doors open to do that. And so, because there's always, when we look at things like the pandemic, there's always going to be a part of the population that is forgotten. And typically, that part of the population that is forgotten is where God usually calls us to. And so we try to be right in the mix of that type of atmosphere because nobody else is going to do it.
So what type of help do you need from other people? And you've already opened the doors. So donations.
Yeah.
Donations so you can get what you need. Do you help them fill out paperwork and things there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. We help people come in, and when you're dealing with a population that we are, often, they don't have any computer skills. Some can't read. We've been helping quite a few of the homeless guys that come in that don't read at all. and therefore can't even get any benefits that the government has given them. And, they don't have bank accounts, don't have licenses. It's just this, it's like this, it just gets harder and harder and harder. And so filling out the paperwork and helping people with things of that nature is part of it. But the other side of it is, financially, we take all this burden on ourselves. And we didn't even increase our budget or anything. We were just like, we're going to open an outreach and resource center, which in hindsight, I'm like, that's really bad business planning on my part, but that's totally par for the course. But we didn't increase, we don't get any funding from the government. We don't get any funding from grants. And we totally rely on donors that have given over the years and faithfully to TI. But we have to raise 100% of our own budget. Mm-hmm. So, we have
You're always fundraising.
Always fundraising. Okay. We always need to. We currently have 4 houses and house about 35 men in TI. And the Sober Truth Project being more of an online basis where we're trying to give resources to people that, come to the online platform. Okay. But with the Outreach Center, we just kind of included that in everything else we're doing. And so trying to raise money for the 35 men that we currently help and then the outreach center and everything has been challenging because you have a lot of people that have lost work, a lot of people that are in their own, kind of situation where, our donor base, which was about 15 people a month, has dropped down to about 8. And, by the grace of God, we've had a few people that have given extra, which has kept us going and kept us moving. But, finances are always a struggle.
So I probably social media you've been using, but do you use your website for donations as well?
Yes, we do.
Okay. I know I've been I need to get back on social hardcore. But so what are your goals for these projects? What type of fundraising do you need to do? I like to give our listeners options. And of course, I'll be pushing it through the Not a Great Whisperer podcast site. But what are some of your goals for? What do you see? Where do you see TI and the Sober Truth Project going?
Sure. With TI right now, what we're trying to do is it operates, we have 4 pillars that we operate under. So we have, our community, our discipleship, our community, and our work therapy, which we have a nonprofit construction business that doesn't, bring in money, but it teaches men trades and things of that nature, which is phenomenal. But we're really hoping to add a few beds to some of the homes so that we can get more men in. And, we've already started a donation thing where we're trying to raise $4,000 to do that. Okay. That'll help with, you have to have a certain number of bathrooms in order to have beds in the homes. So we're trying to do that right now. And for the Sober Truth Project, I'm in the middle of writing a book that is the manuscript's supposed to be done in December, and we're really excited about that. And we want to launch some of the trainings and things like that on video along with the book. And so we're thinking that project's going to cost about $5,000. Oh. So we're trying to raise money in order to do that. And what we're really hoping is, since the Sober Truth Project just got launched last month, or 2 months ago, rather, it's, the platform is still building. So we're also looking for people that just want to contribute blogs or social media help or things of that nature. So it's sort of an easy way you want to get involved in helping a ministry or an organization if you're not, a Christian or whatever, but do believe in mental health and addiction and suicide prevention. We need help with people with those types of skills as well.
So services right now you provide for them? Counseling or?
Right now we have an online counseling that we sub out. Okay. So there's services that you can kind of, attach people to, but we do want to we want to start one of our own sort of virtual training systems that we could put in there, but that's kind of our next year goal. It's already October, so that's coming up quick. Yes. But we're hoping next year to have virtual trainings and virtual recovery groups for things of that nature.
You get more people involved and it gets more, instead of just local, you're getting people from really everywhere. I can't believe you're going to finish a book by December.
Yeah.
That's a big deal, and that's quick. But that's amazing. I think that's important too, to have your message behind you in a book for people to grab and and be able to follow along. So I think your goals are doable. It's just a lot more outreach.
Yeah.
I've seen the power of social and websites and just getting your name out there because your message is powerful. What is some of the pushback you get from people?
You know, like I said before, I'm 51, so I'm a little bit of this older generation and trying to learn this whole social media online thing. But ironically before the coronavirus even hit, my model was going to be an online platform that people could. But for one, I want it to be worldwide. I don't want it to just be Tampa. And so for Sober Truth Project, it was going to be, I wanted it to be an online platform where we could do virtual trainings and virtual teachings and all of that type of stuff. And the pushback I would get from people was like, now you need to start local and have groups that meet. You need to be, and this should be an in-person thing. And for me, I already started and ran the TI for the last 10 years, and that's an in-person, one-on-one discipleship type of model. And my model was just not that. It was like, I think there's a way to do this online and really attract a lot of people. And so I would get a lot of pushback. So then the coronavirus hits and everybody's virtual. So it's like,
they're like, oh, you should go online now. And
no,
you're
like, oh yeah, this is great.
Has anybody been your mentor? What was the guy's name?
Pops.
Yeah,
Was
there any other mentors in your life that you go to for business too? Because this essentially is a business, but of course it's people focused and changing lives. But like, is there anybody that you go to, or are you learning everything as you go?
No, I mean, I think part of recovery, is just being wise and putting people around you. Since the beginning of TI, I've had this amazing family, the Kimbroughs, Kevin and Kathleen Kimbrough, that basically TI wouldn't have existed without them. They gave big in the beginning and kept giving. And, I'm even tearing up now because, they've just given so much to the ministry and they're still in our lives and we're still doing work together. Kevin's a successful businessman. And so he's helped me with a lot of that throughout the years. Recently over the last 6 months, I met a guy by the name of Alex McKinnon, and he's also an amazing businessman here locally in Tampa and has a lot of connections. And he's really been helping me. He's helping me with the book and raise the money because I did hire a ghostwriter because, as people like to tell me, my attention deficit disorder, I would not be able to write a book on my own. At least not one that anybody would want to read.
Different topics everywhere.
Yeah.
But I think ghostwriting is important because you're able to not have to focus on the writing part and you can just say it. And that I think is more genuine, and the authenticity of it is powerful. So,
and I did,
everything right. You did everything right.
I did choose to put her on the girl. I'm writing it with a woman by the name of Britt Eaton, and she's amazing and Holy Spirit filled and type of person where just loves the Lord and loves recovery. So, but I'm like, she's like, I can either write this and be behind the scenes, make you look brilliant, and then no one needs to know. I said, no, I wouldn't be able to live with that. So I'd rather you just wrote it and we said you wrote it with me, because I would really feel like a hypocrite if people were like, man, you're such an amazing writer.
You're such a good writer. And
I'm like, yeah,
I didn't write
my
that.
spare time.
I just spoke. I think that's good. It's humbling, and it's also you're giving credit where credit's due. It is your story. She's not going to say this is my story,
right.
But she helped you write it. It's not like a bad. And that's another thing with just the background of just like owning your story, but also being. I love that you said I don't want to cry right now. Please cry. Like I think that's the most genuine thing you can do. I think also as a man who's coming in with sleeves, everyone's probably like, oh, he's super masculine or something like that. But when you show your true heart, I think it's way more powerful than just like what people judge you on right away, right?
The funny thing is living in community. So if my people were here, they would be making fun of me because I I cry at every one of these silly Christmas TV shows on Netflix. I cry at them. I cry at TV. I just cry all the time on these things. My wife or the guys that I live with will look at me and they'll be like, are you crying right now?
You're like, yes.
Like, well, yes, it's sad. I think of the life I didn't have. Anyway.
I am excited about all of the new things happening. I think after this, we need to figure out like a fundraiser day to just kind of figure out how to help and get the word out more. I think the people that have been in your path and you've you've collaborated with so far have gotten you here, but there's just so many more people you will connect with either family members of addiction or people living it right now. It's just so common.
Yeah.
And it's very ordinary and people don't realize because they don't want to talk about it.
That's just the problem. And so, for me, and I think why, you and I hit it off on the phone when we had our conversation, but there's, you asked me the question, how did I feel the first time I shared? And it's like, yeah, there's shame there, but the thing about shame is it's a lie, right? So shame is a lie from, something that wants to destroy you. Mm-hmm. And I think that this culture has been indoctrinated with this idea that recovery needs to be anonymous. And man, if you do the research on AA and all of that, and I'm not knocking that, I think it's amazing that it's helped people, but it set the precedent for the way we look at recovery now. And there's not even any tangible proof that it is right. And so I can look at it and say, there's way more power in me saying, I am a person in long-term recovery and I am proud of the hard work that I've done to get here today, rather than I need to go hang out with a group of people that are in recovery and share with them. Mm-hmm. Why are we ashamed of the work we put in? Yeah. And a lot of people that end up in addiction ended up there because they were sexually or physically abused. They went through things in trauma as a child that were not their fault. And so if that was not their fault, then why do we make them live out of a life of hiding as if it was? Mm-hmm. And that's all got to change. It's just the whole system of the way we look at recovery around mental health addiction needs to change. It needs to be revamped.
Yeah. And I'm 100% behind that. I think the label I have as a wife of a recovering addict, it was really hard sharing at first and just talking about the occurrence and talking about when everything came to light. And when I figured it was very shameful, and I'm like, why am I ashamed? Like, this is something really hard we're getting through. And I think it's powerful in its own. And then you see people coming up to you and talking and telling their story and feeling this sense of relief because they haven't been able to share it. And you're like, wow. Yeah. Like, I'm sorry if you felt that you can't tell your story too.
Right.
So I love what you're doing. We have the timothyinitiative.org, sobertruthproject.org.
Yep.
And social media.
Yep.
They'll find you on Not a Great Whisperer podcast. Any other messaging you want to leave with today? Pastor George?
I do because I don't necessarily know your audience, but I kind of got a feel for
Everyone.
you. And I want to say this. I want to say if you've given up on church and religion, that's fine. But just know that Jesus is real, and he's not the person or the people or the group that turned you off to him. And he's probably totally different than them. And that Jesus actually is this amazing figure that wants to connect you to this Father in heaven who loves you and sees you and adores you and is not judging you. And actually in Scripture, it says he's not judging you. So just don't think that the church, if that's what hurts you, is the only version of Jesus that's real.
I love that. Thank you. That was a powerful ending. Thank you for joining today.
Yes, this has been great.
Awesome.
I always I love to talk. And so I'm always like, oh no, I'm just going to start rambling on. And I don't even know.
I navigated us.
Yes, you did. I was watching. I was like, oh, she's navigating. Oh boy. So then I get all self-conscious. Oh no, I said too much. But
no, it was perfect.
Yeah.
I thank you. And we're going to, after your book, we'll do another podcast and kind of talk about that and your launch. You're going to be busy the next few months, but I'm excited for the next steps for everything. And I'm so glad we crossed paths. Thanks for joining again. You'll see us at Not a Great Whisperer podcast. We are at BKN Creative Studio in Ybor, and Pastor George was on. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.